You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to another video version of Cemetery Confessions. I am your host, Danny Ashes, and I am here in studio with my co-host, Trey. On this episode, we are going to be exploring the relevance of music to the goth scene. We'll be contemplating the subcultural substance of the scene, to what degree goths in different parts of the world and country share aesthetic, ideology, sartorial idioms, that kind of thing. And if we have time, we'll talk about whether or not Cybergoth is goth, among other things. Our guests this episode are Ophelia Darkley, who is a DJ, model, author, and doll tarot reader, which is just the tip of the iceberg there, and Victor Nova, who is a DJ, multi-instrumentalist, currently a member of the band The Secret Light, and sound engineer at the Coffin Club, among many other talents. So thank you both for taking time to chat with us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yes, welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you for having us.
So exciting.
We can begin at the beginning, which is with introductions. So if you can kind of share your journey into the dark heart of goth, your sort of origin story, I would love to hear it.
You want to go first?
You go first.
You want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, like, I was thinking about this question pretty in depth, and I was wondering, I was like, where does it really start? Because I have these like really pivotal moments, but I feel like, I mean, I've always been weird. Like, I've always been strange. Like, I would like be writing like really bizarre novels about like ghosts and demons and monsters when I was like 6, and my parents were like, is she okay? Like, what's going on? And so I always knew like I was pretty weird, but I think the pivotal moment for me was when I was 13 years old and we had an Edgar Allan Poe unit in class, and we learned all about him, and I became instantly obsessed. Like, I had no idea about this. Like, I was already like writing some dark poetry, like brooding in a corner, but like I did not like know about Edgar Allan Poe. And so I bought like the holy tome of like Edgar Allan Poe and then we like, I was like obsessed, like just poring over the pages.
Nice.
So good. And then we went on to like the Iditarod lesson or something. We were learning about that. And I was like, no, please go back. Like I felt like I was like understood. And then for me, it started with like fashion. Like I was like, I was at Hot Topic when it was cool. I was just saying, like, you know, in the beginning though, where it was like legit goths
Actual
were going
goth,
there, and there was like lip service there and like really cool brands.
Yeah.
And so
I kind of forgot that Hot Topic was once that.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
And I was like really into like dark fashion, but I didn't know the music yet until I like went into like LimeWire. I'm like dating myself.
Yes,
right?
I did the same
You
thing.
know?
Yeah.
I was like on LimeWire, like, and I was like discovering all these bands like Sisters of Mercy and even The Cure and Susie and all of these really cool bands, but they were of course mislabeled. Like the songs were mislabeled.
Every funny song was Voltaire.
Yeah, it's all Voltaire. It's all Danzig. Like it's all. I'm like, I was like a confused teenager for a bit because I really didn't know who was singing these songs. But then after that, I would say like my other Mecca moment was like when I was 18 and I first got to go to Nocturna in Chicago with Scary Lady Sarah, and that was when I really felt like, wow, like I am home. Like as silly as that sounds, like everything kind of fit together at that point. And I was like just surrounded by so many amazing like alternative people that were so fascinating and creative. And I feel like that was like a really, really important moment for me and kind of like a big part of my origin story. So Thank you, scary lady Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. All of the goths in Chicago owe you their lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So true.
And beyond.
And beyond. Yes.
What about you, Victor? As you drink, sorry.
Hey, I can multitask.
Okay.
In
Um,
his skull glass. Can we look at this? I mean,
Beautiful.
you can't,
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're listening, you
This is
can't
another
see
one
it.
of Ophelia's Halloween.
Oh, I love the
Nice.
bulb at the bottom of the
Doors.
glass too. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, just got.
I feel like my
excellent
glassware
taste in
isn't
drink
cool
there.
enough now. I gotta go get something else quickly.
Oh, no. Don't judge.
So I first wandered into a goth club kind of randomly, but I didn't really know much about the scene. I was already a big fan of Skinny Puppy just from people giving me music recommendations to listen to, and I didn't ever really use LimeWire much, but I used Kazaa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was a
also
Kazaa
use
user
Kazaa,
more
yeah.
than LimeWire, I think.
Kind of the same thing, but
Yeah.
slightly different time periods. And I was a big fan of The Cure, but I had no idea, like I had just no concept that I just was ignorant to the fact that The Cure was goth. I did
Hmm.
not realize that. And part of that was because my the first the first couple of albums I heard by The Cure was Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, which has a bunch of happy songs on it and like silly, kind of lighthearted. The actual lyrics themselves like
Hmm.
can get quite dark sometimes, but the sound and vibe of a lot of those songs is happy, and there's some totally dark songs on there as well. But um, anyways, I I it took me a long time to realize that the goth community was my people, and I feel like, and that's just because of not being exposed to it really. I just didn't it wasn't until my mid-20s somebody took me to a goth night and I was like, whoa, this is cool.
Yeah.
I've I'm into this. Like I always thought, I was kind of intimidated by goths. I've always been like a weirdo myself, but I guess I didn't realize until actually spending a little bit of time like at goth clubs that, oh, goths aren't scary. It's actually just a big group of nerds.
Yeah.
I had
And
no
it really,
idea.
It really often
Um,
is.
It was like, and I'm a huge nerd who likes to dress up. Why didn't someone tell me before? But it wasn't until I joined a Cure tribute band as the keyboard player. This was the Exploding Boys, who are now defunct, but it's a long-running Cure tribute band based out of Portland. And but my old band at the time, Pink Noise, I was just looking for bands to play with, and we hit them up, and it didn't work out. But they were looking for a keyboard player, and that's my main instrument. And so I ended up joining. It was a great fit, and then I found myself smack in the middle of the goth scene, and we were like playing fairly well attended shows at the time, and I just sort of got plunged right in the middle of it, and there was really no turning back at that point.
No turning back. Yeah. Forever goth.
Oh my God, Victor's
You just
vanished into
filled the
smoke
room
like a
with-
vampire.
So good.
Reapparate. We got to finish the show.
Trade, have we met in Chicago before? I was
I-
trying
Oh, we
to
were
like,
just talking about that.
I don't know.
I was like, I was like, you look so familiar. I swear I've seen you, but like, I don't know that we've ever had a conversation.
It's very possible we haven't had a conversation because I show up at clubs. I'm a regular attendee. I'm there at most of at least the big events. I haven't missed a Nocturna in years, but I don't necessarily interact with that many people. I go and I watch and I dance.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll know a couple people and say hi, and I might have a couple of people I'm actually hanging out with, but I'm not really usually one of in like a big group of people just chatting. If I'm engaged with someone, or if someone engages with me, I'll usually chat with them, but I don't go out of my way to interact. I'm one of those people that likes to hold up the wall. You may have seen me on the dance floor. I'm usually one of the first people on the dance floor, and I have no qualms about being the only person on the dance floor. Yeah. So
that's awesome. I'm the same.
Yeah.
Where did you meet Victor in Portland, or did you guys know each other before then?
Yeah, I met him here in Portland. Okay. Yeah.
Was was Cold Waves his first time at Metro, or he's been?
Oh, at Nocturna. Yeah, we were there like before Cold Waves a little bit.
Oh, okay. Or no, it was Nocturna.
Yeah,
we're both at the same place, so I don't know.
Yeah. That was his first time in Chicago ever.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Did you get your water in your skull cup?
Yes.
Everything has to be extra.
I don't know if you can tell. This is a skull.
It is a skull.
What I really enjoy about being able to do the podcast, because I don't travel very much, but I enjoy being able to hear from Goths that are all over the world, all over parts of the country. And I find it really fascinating to learn about the lives and environments of Goths that are separate from my experience. I remember a long time ago, Gothic Beauty used to do an annual top 10 best cities for Goths. And that was one of my favorite things to read, this sort of breakdown about what makes a community good and healthy for the Goth scene. So in that tradition, I wanted to ask you guys a few questions about that, because I know you've traveled around. And I thought we could start with some information about your Goth city of origin and get a little bit of the flavor and your experience. So things like the types of personalities and cliques that were there, the kind of music people listened to, what kind of relationships you formed, if other subcultures were involved in the scene, like any kind of flavor stuff like that.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about with this subject. Like, it gets me very excited. I mean, I came from Chicago, obviously. So, I mean, I have some shared experiences with the both of you. But I would say, like, even when I just went back there, like recently in the past few months, like it was very different. So it kind of struck me how much the scenes are evolving like throughout the years. And I wonder if like the pandemic was like a big part of that too. I'm not exactly sure, but it seems like maybe that is a part of it. And these scenes are like always evolving. Like there's so many different, I think the environment definitely impacts like the scene itself, but then there's definitely like certain kind of personas each city has that I feel like is a big thing. And like Portland is definitely very different from Chicago, for example.
We're very eclectic here.
Yeah,
I'm from here.
I've seen the memes. Yeah.
What are the memes? I don't know if I've seen
everyone has a septum ring, that kind of thing.
I mean, just the generally keep Portland weird stuff.
Don't look over here.
No, I do not to interrupt you at all, but just to agree with you. I did notice when I went back to Nocturna after kind of lockdown, I don't remember how long after, like a year or two, there was just immediately a noticeable difference. To me, it seemed like there were a lot more queer people, openly, visibly queer people, and younger people than I was used to seeing, which was great. I loved that.
I have the exact same observation in Portland, interestingly enough.
Weird.
I mean, the goth scene has always been like very queer friendly, but it seems like there's just been a huge influx of queer, like gender queer people coming into Goth Night, which is awesome. Like it's cool to see like the fashion and the like freedom of expression that's happening, like very, very out in the open, very plainly, and it's cool. I love it.
Yeah, and like Nocturna, I know, was always like a very well attended night. But like when I went, it was like there were so many people. It was like insane, like how many people there were. And I really wonder too if part of that is like the internet and like TikTok and that sort of thing, and like content creators, and if they're getting like people excited to be in more of a community. And then also just the pandemic, because we were away from all of that for
Yeah.
so long. And like finally, like we all get to like come together again, I think is a really big, big part of it too.
Yeah, the population really skyrocketed in Chicago post-pandemic. I think part of it also was, unfortunately, the consolidation of club crowds, because we did have a lot of venues that did not survive the pandemic. So the handful that still did get the overflow, even people who didn't like, it might not have been their favorite club, but if their favorite club closed and you still want to go out, you have to suck it up and go to maybe a not your favorite, but still it's hitting some of that vibe that you want, some of what you want to go out to. But yeah, I've definitely noticed, usually Nocturna was, you had the 3 nights a year, which were really, really crowded. You had the Halloween night, the anniversary night, and the Valentine's Day were usually the 3 biggest nights. And Halloween and Valentine's Day were usually bar none the biggest. Now, just this last year, at least, especially, I was like, oh yeah, Valentine's Day is going to be really bad, but maybe the spring one won't be so busy, and I can have some space on the dance floor. Nope. every event of Nocturna this year has been just packed with people, which is great for Nocturna. I just want more space on the dance floor, though.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Like
fair, fair.
you want your community to thrive, but at the same time, you like want to be able to do your big dance moves.
I do.
Without
yes.
bumping into people. Yeah.
No, I hear that. Um, I also want to say, like, I think a big difference too between some cities and like Portland specifically is that they're very events based because they don't have like kind of a space to go to all the time. Like we are completely spoiled. We
Yeah.
have a goth club that is open several days a week. And there's
Wow.
different music, different DJs. There we have 2 different floors and like I mean, there's like a center for people to come together like all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas like something like Chicago, obviously it's more events based. And so like there's way more turnout, I would say,
Mhm.
oftentimes.
And it's
Or
a bigger city.
yeah,
too.
it's a bigger city and there's more division within as well because there's maybe different events going on in the same night, whereas there's not as much of that here. But there's definitely like a lot to say about that. I think events based versus having kind of a home to go to all the time.
Yeah, and even with Nocturna, it used to be every month, and now it's only every other month. I know
Yeah.
Neo
Yeah.
kind of used to be.
I was going to say that was the big thing
It
that I
was,
noticed was the
yeah.
different is when Neo was around. That was the stalwart. That was the I don't have any events planned, but I want to do something this weekend. Let's go out to Neo because Neo usually had something going on that was very much goth adjacent, if not directly goth industrial. It was usually something, whether it was a metal night or a fetish night, it was something you could go to. So any weekend you wanted to do something, Neo was right there for you. When Neo closed down, there wasn't really anything that came to replace it. The closest is probably Late Bar,
Yeah.
because they do have regular punk nights. They have the 80s night, new wave night on Saturdays. So that's a good, go to afterwards. And now they do have Bittersweet happens there too. So they do have a nominally goth night as well, but it's not every weekend. But at least if I wanted to go out and do something at a club that I would enjoy that at least caters to alternative subculture rather than just standard pickup women club environment,
Right.
Yeah.
Late Bar is generally good for that. It's also convenient for me, but it's also very small.
It's so
So-
small. Yeah.
So it's hit and miss there, where I would love something like Nocturna to be more regular, but having run or at least been involved in the running of smaller goth clubs, and it was a smaller city, admittedly, I found that the turnout can be really painful if it isn't all the time thing, because then you have the people like, well, I could go out, but
It's always
I
there.
don't really feel
next
like
week.
it.
Yeah.
I can just go next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found myself DJing to empty rooms because nobody wanted to come out because it is something that you just expect to always happen.
Yeah.
Whereas when something's every month or heck, bi-monthly is even worse, you can't miss it. You have to go. Otherwise, you're going to be without anything for a while. So there's really a trade-off there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I mean, maybe we don't like fall, I don't know, victim to that as much just because we're a smaller city. So people do come out all the time, but I will say there's like a difference in the variety of people. As in like I don't know, when we went to Nocturna, it's like basically everyone I looked at had an alternative vibe as far as fashion goes. Whereas like in our clubs, to our dismay, especially on the weekends, like all sorts of people will come in. And what I mean is like tourists come in and they're like taking
Yep.
photos. We have bro downs at the club,
good.
like people like demanding 80s music, like
Yeah.
that are just like,
That's just me.
There's been this I don't
well,
know
that's
if this
fine,
is if
but
this is a phenomenon you've seen, but we've been getting a bunch of like clown people coming in lately.
I bet that's
Yeah.
Portland specific.
Clown goth is a thing. Yeah, it is. It got a lot bigger over the pandemic. It's still a pretty
Are they-
small
I
even
don't
community.
heard of it
know,
before.
though. I don't know.
I mean, they're coming to a goth.
I'm
club.
not sure, but
I mean, to me, it's goth turning up the glam influence. It's fine. And I think I think also the rise of drag is influencing that as well.
Yeah.
The very, very stylized aesthetic that is drag makeup dovetails very well with the clown aesthetic as well.
Mm,
Yeah, I never even considered that.
yeah. But we have like a lot of just like people off the street, like normies coming in to the club. So then that like poses the question, like, is this a space for them? Or like what like how do we determine like how we feel about like certain people coming in the space, and like is it our place to judge like based on their appearance, or is it like their actions, or like I don't know. I think it can get really complex thinking about that, but it can get frustrating, and a lot of people in our scene specifically are like really wanting different events to happen where it's more of an alternative focus and less of just like everyone shows up and then they like take over our dance floor. It's more like goth centric, alternative centric events. And that's why we've kind of like thought about making our own events and have done our own events for that reason.
Yeah, I agree. I guess my closest analog would have been Medusa's when it was in Elgin, which is outside of Chicago, because it was on the third floor, middle floor.
I mean, it was the top floor. I'm never really sure if it was 2 floors or 3
I'm pretty
floors.
sure it was 3.
But it was 2 sets of stairs. I just don't know if the first set of stairs, if there was something at the ground floor, or if the first floor, because I never was actually in a dance space on more than the 2 floors.
Well, they had.
I don't know what was at the bottom.
Yeah, they had normie. They had other events that weren't.
It was usually kind of a
there.
Latin themed night on the main floor, and then Medusa's, the more dark wave agrotech night, was on the top floor.
But the venue, I don't know if you guys do. The venue had security, so there was always security around, because they would get a lot of people that would just kind of wander up. And you would see them walk in and see their faces, and they were very confused and startled, which is always fun. But you always
some of them, a few of them crossed over to the dark side.
Yeah, I hope so.
I bet we got some of them.
But there was always that thing in your stomach where you would kind of worry, like, all right, is this person? They kind of look a certain way, and maybe younger people don't have that issue anymore. But I know, having been bullied by jocks and whatever, there's still some of that in my monkey brain that's like danger, so you kind of had to worry about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is there's that sort of that idea that a lot of people on this podcast, and I've seen it all over, when they first experience going to a goth club as an alternative individual, this idea of this safe sanctum, the space that you can go to, be yourself, you're not getting yelled at, spit on, catcalled, whatever. It's a safe space to express yourself, let your goth freak flag fly without all the judgment that you feel you get when just out in public. And when you have the public coming into your safe space, there is that question of, is this someone that's just, dressed down and is still a person that can be part of that safe space, or is that person potentially dangerous? Are they going to be, a predator, somebody looking for that goth dommy mommy or big titty goth GF thing, depending on which era of the meme you're looking at? And then there's also just the dynamic, the difference in dynamic between goth club space and sort of the mainstream sort of pop club space. As at least the way I've always viewed it, as a goth club space is about self-expression and enjoying yourself, but not necessarily where you're trying to pick up people. You don't interact with people, especially on the dance floor. The dance floor dynamic is usually the biggest culture shock. The idea that at a goth club, in general, people dance alone. I mean, it's alone together, but alone. Whereas in a lot of the more standard mainstream club scenes, you're dancing with other people. You are grinding up against people, or you're starting a circle so you can dance with the whole group. And it's a very different dynamic. And when someone comes in from the outside, bringing that dynamic, you get those people who just want to dance up towards a person, usually a man, dancing up to a woman who isn't into that thing. They want to just be their expressive self in their own headspace of enjoying the music and the atmosphere that it is creating in their head and expressing it in physical movement. So that dynamic is always a potential point of conflict when people who aren't used to that dynamic at a club come in and kind of use the club etiquette that they've learned from the ones they're used to going to, and how those conflict in the goth spaces.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
It was a culture shock to me the first time I went to a bro meat market club. Like me and some friends did it as a social experiment. Like kind of tried to dress up like as normie as we could. I'm sure we still looked very out
you
of
didn't
place.
fool anyone.
Yeah, can
I'm
you
sure,
picture
yeah.
that? I
Yeah.
I wore like a baseball
You did
cap.
not. No. No, 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 no.
But it's so weird. Like it is.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about it?
Oh, it's
Tell us about your ethnographic
I wanna
the
know.
whole,
field
the whole
research.
like booty grinding, like aggressive,
Yeah.
like
I'm into it. Yeah.
Misogynist.
like
Oh well, that I'm not into.
it's like
Yeah.
the shark swooping in. Like it's very I don't know, like National Geographic, like
See the cheetah,
like raw
looking
human.
at the gazelle across the plain.
It spots a potential mate. Watch as it performs the waggle dance.
But I mean, even without the predatory side of things, just the normal, quote unquote, healthy behavior in the two club dynamics are so different.
Yeah.
And
Not to say that goth clubs are
They're not.
paragons of ethical behavior.
No,
by no
no,
means.
no.
we have our own predators
Yeah.
that have their own camouflage, but
Yeah.
the dynamic is just very different.
Tell us some more about. It doesn't have to be Coffin Club. Just like your general feel over the years in Portland. If we can hear a little about that community and how it compares.
I mean, I've only really visited a few other places. So I, and I live here. And I have lived here for basically my whole life.
Yeah.
Los Angeles feels a lot different than Portland, I mean, partially because it's Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And everything's got a little of that LA flair in it. I don't know. Like I feel like I haven't spent enough time in other cities like goth club scene to really be able to say.
Have you both been to Germany for any of the festivals?
Yeah, only one. Well, we both.
Yeah, we both went
once
last year. I performed it.
We went to
Oh, awesome!
Nice.
Yeah.
So what was that? I mean, obviously that's a very curated. It's a festival, so it's not
right.
But I'd be curious to hear what your experience there was like.
I will say that it's very obvious that the actual like city and the culture like supports the arts way more than they do here in America. Like especially musicians, like they just were very, very accommodating. Even though I was like in the opening band, like they treated me as if I was like the main act. Like they were
good.
They had all this catering. They were like, can we get you anything? What can we do for you? Like we had our own like green room area. Like they were just so awesome. I can't even say like enough nice things about them. And it just seems like, especially with that event, like so many people were just so excited to be there, and there was just such an immersion of like culture and like the arts and music and fashion, and it was just like I'll never forget that experience for sure. It was amazing.
A lot of things that were familiar from the goth community, just like on a macro scale, like the huge variety of fashion on display, like, in one, you know, 30-foot,
Mhm.
train car.
Yeah.
And I would like huge, like, 4 or 5 decades worth of, there's people in their 20s to people in their 60s, all
Or even children.
hanging out and attending the same. Yeah, actually, yeah, even kids.
We took over the city. It was like, I don't know if you've ever been, but
No.
like
I've seen
it's
video,
like
but that's the
Yeah.
it's
closest.
hard to
Yeah.
explain. It's like a takeover of the entire city. Everywhere you go, there's people, or it's like your people, and they're all around you, and it's like very cool to have that experience. When we went to Berlin, it was pretty different because it's a very techno heavy
Yeah.
city, and
Yeah.
people are
Yep.
more, I don't know, like they have a very small goth club that's kind of like what our club, the Coffin Club, used to be when it was very small.
Hmm.
And then like that's it. Like there's goth nights that happen, but like I was very surprised for a city like Berlin that is like very experimental and like very like fashion conscious and
Very huge.
into
Yeah.
there's more a focus on, I would say, like fetish nights and techno.
That's what I was
Yeah.
wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, I know techno. I mean, Berlin, Germany in general, but Berlin especially is just known for their techno scene. Their all weekend techno events that are,
Yeah, and we went to one of
72
those.
hours of
Oh, really?
constant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Go out
we
on
were
Friday, get back on
intrigued.
Monday.
We're like we should try to go.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
the hardest
we
club in the
we
world, right?
we got into
Apparently.
Berghain.
Oh,
Yeah, like,
nice.
oh,
Okay.
we'll
Yeah.
try to go. Like, we'll probably get rejected. We dressed to the nines, like super gothy, like
Hmm.
dark, like really like crazy fashion. The other people in our line, they were like traditional, like what you would expect being in this line, like just
Right.
like all black, like kind of sleek, more modern
Hmm.
looks, but like more minimalist for sure.
Oh,
And I was
interesting.
like, I don't know if we're gonna get in, and we did. And like there, it was very interesting because like we stood out, but we didn't.
Hmm.
Like there weren't other people really dressed like that, but like everyone was basically doing their own thing. And I mean, I don't know how much we can share. It's like a secret in there, but it's it's an experience for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell
If
me
only
everyone
we
you bought
were.
drugs from.
Don't look at my
If only we were more
sign.
into techno, we probably would have stayed a lot
Yeah, that's a
longer.
lot of
Yeah.
techno to
Yeah.
do that long. No, I was curious about the fashion as well, just because there is this idea that because of social media, a lot of fashion sort of gravitates towards a common denominator or whatever's sort of being promoted. But it seems like, I guess, even in just at Treffen specifically, I don't know if you notice fashion differences between other cities in America, but it seems like there's still a pretty broad array of styles that are being employed rather than just the same kind of stereotypical TikTok goth makeup or whatever you want to point to.
Yeah.
Yeah, like super, super diverse. That's one of the things I really like about it, is that there's not really one way you're supposed to look.
Mhm.
There's like, there's like fetishy goths, who, wear very little clothing, or
Hmm.
there's like, uh, I don't know what you call them, Ren Fair type
Oh,
goths,
sure, yeah.
or like, there's the kind of more
Cravats and
punk.
brocade. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's the more kind of like punk looking goths, and it's just there's the like black jeans and just a black sweatshirt
Mhm.
minimalist type of goths.
Yeah, the band shirt and jeans.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
There's so many, and yeah, I think they all, I don't know, like I think there's been an explosion in the scene because it wasn't always like that as much, maybe.
Yeah.
Like I wonder, like I know, you know, I don't know, back in the day, in the 80s, it's like you were thrifting a lot of pieces, right? And like you were like, there weren't as many shops. And now it's like, it's kind of in a way oversaturated. Like you see it everywhere, like different sorts of like alt fashion. And then there's like way more flavors than ever, I would say, maybe of like alternative fashion. Maybe it's always
Yeah.
been like that. Who knows?
Yeah, no,
But
I mean, I
I,
definitely remember like in the 2000s, a lot of everybody was wearing romantic goth stuff, or everybody was doing Cybergoth, or everybody was doing
Trip pants.
death rock in the like late, yeah,
Hmm.
trip mall
Yep.
goth, yeah. Um,
Way to pull out all the taxonomies.
yeah. And I've worn all of them.
yeah.
Uh, well, let me, I wanted to ask about how you got into DJing, because it's one of the things I love about the goth community is almost everyone gets involved in some way instead of just going out to nights, which is fine. That's great. Like supporting your local scene that way. But it seems like at some point, almost everybody tries their hand at doing something, doing a podcast or whatever, like random stuff. So what was it that drew you into DJing, and yeah, why did that attract you?
I got roped into DJing by a friend of mine, who so I'm also a fan of synthwave. It has
Mhm.
nothing to do with goth music at all. I don't even think
Yeah,
it's
I can see it back there. Yeah,
very much
I,
on the
I also enjoy
spectrum.
synthwave. Yeah, sure.
I'm a huge synthwave fan.
Nice,
I
nice.
wouldn't say nothing because they have a
I mean,
cinematic
Yeah, there's
similarity because
something.
a lot of synthwave is based on 80s horror soundtracks.
yeah, that's true. That's
Mhm.
true.
So that is I'd say the genetic link between the two.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there are a lot of since synthwave kind of blew up a few years back. Like there's definitely some of those sounds making their way into like newer, dark
Yeah.
wave.
Yeah,
Like,
that's why dark
um,
synth is a thing.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Which
um,
he plays a lot of.
yeah. That's
Mm.
mainly what I play. Well, actually, let me back up. Um, a friend of mine roped me into starting a synthwave dance night in Portland. This was like a few years before the pandemic, and I'd never DJ'd before, aside from just kind of throwing a playlist together and putting it on for a party or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, sure, I'll do it. I'm a synth player and very like music tech friendly, and so it was a pretty easy transition for me to pick it up and I don't know. I guess it just kind of took somebody asking me, like kind of pushing me over the edge to get me to actually do it. I'd always been pretty critical about other DJs and had lots of
Hmm.
opinions. I'd go out and be like, why don't they play something I could dance to?
Uh-huh.
And then
So you're a goth, is what you're saying.
right, yeah, yeah. And yeah, so anyways, we started this synthwave dance night. It was on a weekday. It like never really took off. But that was kind of how it got started. And then I got so once my foot was already in the door, uh, DJing at the club, I started getting asked to do other stuff. And friend Jody Rose, who lived in Portland at the time, asked if I wanted to um, start a new night with him playing new music, like stuff that came out within the past 5 years, like in the goth spectrum. And I thought that was awesome. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
because he
those are
knew that
fun
was,
nights.
yeah. And so we started that. And that was also it was on a Monday. It never got huge, but it was always fun. Um, and then that, I at that point I was DJing goth darkwave stuff more than I was DJing synthwave at the time. And synthwave was never like my number one, but yeah, I went through a phase there for a bit, but it was uh my number one stuff that I have been into has always been stuff in the dark wave spectrum.
Yeah.
And so started getting more opportunities to DJ here and there for that. And then when the pandemic started, Started DJing on Twitch like so many other DJs, and joining that awesome community.
I was like feeding Victor a bunch of music all the time because I would like I kept finding really
Yeah.
cool songs and I was like, you should play this, you should play that, you should play that. And he was like, I think you should just be a DJ. I was like,
Yeah.
no, I have too many other things going on. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. Just play these songs for me when you DJ live or whatever. And then we started doing Twitch during the pandemic, and I was just like the background dancer. Like really, like, but I would feed him music
No, we
still.
we were all stuck at home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no clubs.
There's no
And
clubs.
remember that first week we're like, oh, it's gonna be a week. Like I remember we had some like we were like all like tropical goth and we were like having drinks, like we were on the beach and like we were like listening to like stuff on Twitch and we were just hanging
Try to make
out.
the
It was
best of it,
Zoom
yeah.
at the time.
Yeah, we're
It
like,
was
oh
Zoom.
yeah, this will all
I was
blow
like,
over in a
it's gonna
week
be
or
a
two.
week. No, it turned into months and months and years and years.
So these Twitch events, DJ events that we did, that was like our main social thing.
Yeah.
And so, I was the one DJing, but Ophelia was super involved, and we would treat them like club nights, and we'd make
Yeah.
flyers for them and blast them all over the internet, and we'd have a Zoom room going for people to come in and chat while they were tuning into the stream. And
Yeah.
so she was like really involved in planning stuff too. She wasn't like just the backup dancer.
Yeah, I was. But like basically I just would start to take over for him when he had to go to the bathroom. Like he would run away and like I would take over a song and then I would like not do anything else. And then after a while, like I was like a lot of music and like I have so much music, I should just try it. And everyone on Twitch was so encouraging. They're like, yeah, start your own channel, do it. Like you totally should. And so then I just started DJing from there. So it was interesting to have my start be like on Twitch and online.
Yeah.
And then I didn't even do like an in-person gig till I think 2022 for the Kaylin Mikla show was the
Oh,
first
nice.
time I ever DJ'd in person.
Hell yeah.
So, and that is a completely different experience for sure than DJing on Twitch, but it's been an awesome journey and it's been interesting because I like so many different genres of music. I've had to kind of split my Twitch streaming into like 2 different nights so that I can do more like my goth death rock, like maybe some 80s like night. And then I have another night where I play a lot of like newer electronic dark wave stuff too.
I am curious about what that transition was like going from here's a virtual audience with a chat room and as also people all over the world probably to
Yes.
here's a room full of people that I can see that I am in some way in control of. Like what was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, Twitch is much more personal, obviously. You can like
Yeah.
talk to people, chat with people, and that's like I would say like just as important almost as the music.
Yeah.
It's like chatting and like connecting with your audience, and you can experiment with a lot more of what you might play. Whereas at a club, like some of the things I play on Twitch or I try out, I would never play at a club. And so with clubs, it's like often like request heavy or like people, you got to like kind of mix in some songs that people know, or you got to think about like the journey people are going on the dance floor, or just like the progression of what you're doing, and be really mindful of the crowd. Like you have to like feed off of their energy. And I think it's helpful because I was like always like really into dancing and I'm a performer, but it's still like it gets frustrating sometimes when you feel like you have to please a crowd versus just playing the things that you really feel called to play.
Yeah. So I was introduced to the concept of these sort of goth tropes as a DJ through the comic Writhe and Shine in the early 2000s, where they would make jokes in that comic about like the one guy who always requests Manson songs, or the person who always complains that it's not trad goth enough, or you always have to play Dead Stars by Covenant, or you have like a blacklist of songs you'll never play again. What kind of tropes have you experienced and dealt with? Does that change in a virtual space? Yeah.
I personally have not had any of that. People
What?
rarely interact with me when I'm spinning at a club.
You think you intimidate people, maybe?
Wow.
I don't think
that,
so.
why do they interact with me then?
Probably because you're a
That's
hot girl.
Sexism.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It could be though. It could be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like we kind of, this was kind of mentioned earlier, but because the spaces that we DJ at in town are places that are open all the time. There's a lot of non-goths that are there, just
Right. Okay.
dancing to whatever, and the club has kind of, and not just Coffin Club. We have another weekly goth night, Hive, at a different venue, and it's also weekly, and I would say that one kind of maybe attracts less normies than
Yeah.
the Coffin Club. But it's, the club's kind of earned a reputation of a place where you can go to hear danceable, good music, regardless of genre, and that brings people in from all over the place. So it's not like a goth only event where it's the room's full of only people in the scene. So
I mean, do you have songs that you won't play because they're overplayed, or do you not have?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, him especially.
yeah,
I'd like to know if you know any off the top of your head.
well, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person with these songs on my list, but like, will not play Lucretia, My Reflection.
Okay, yeah.
I will not play, Every Day's Halloween
Yeah, that's a good one.
or
Yeah.
Revenge. I mean, they're
Oh,
great songs,
Revenge,
but
yeah.
like,
I'll play some of them.
been overplayed to death.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
enjoy the
Military
silence.
fashion show.
Mhm.
Oh, enjoy the
Yeah,
silence.
yeah.
It's get old.
um,
And I don't know if it's just our city, but there is like this push for, especially on the weekends, like for 80s. And like,
Mm.
we love 80s, but it's like a lot of like top
Aha.
40 80s.
Yeah, they want the pop
Like,
hits,
this-
not
it-
just something from the 80s, but the 80s hits that you get on an
Yeah.
80s radio station.
Or Nine Inch Nails, Manson, like there's
yeah.
all these things, and like and every DJ has their own personal flavor. Like I don't like playing future pop. I just will not do it usually. But like
Thank you.
he enjoys it though.
I'm
so it's
upset.
like,
I'm into
it's like fun. But like
I
you know-
I understand if you don't like it.
but which is fine. But I think
Not everyone has to have good taste. It's fine.
I think what's great is that there's so much more music than ever, right? I think with the capabilities of people being able to record, make music, whatever, like I feel like there's more musicians than ever. And I mean, Portland is such a rich scene for like new bands that a lot of the DJs will play their music. And because I think also our club venue is also our music venue, they're very, very
Yeah.
interwoven. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
like a lot of my DJ friends, like they play like local new bands. And so a lot of the club is being exposed to that, which I think is very cool. And we
That
try to
is
do
cool.
that on Twitch also. Just because I feel like I used to be one of those people that was like, oh, I only like 80s and some 90s goth, and like I don't like new music. Like I can't find any of it. And I was like, wow, do you hear yourself? Like
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think there was a good period of time where there just wasn't a lot of, or especially a lot of good goth music being made.
sure.
I did want to ask, I don't know if you've paid attention that much, but the sort of the hype about 80s music, is that coming more from people who are nostalgic of the 80s because they were there, or like 20s people in their 20s that are like, this is an internet trend or something,
It seems to me like it's not people who were there. It's
Okay.
people who were, in their yeah, in the
Just
20s,
idealizing.
30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the trope is always that 30-year cycle. Though admittedly, the 80s is now in the 40-year era now, but still, and 90s is becoming kind of big too. But
Yeah.
there's that idea that people start becoming nostalgic for stuff that's 30 years roughly old, and that seems to hold up pretty well through the years, in my experience.
Yeah, yeah, and it could also be because maybe younger people are going out and hearing a lot of this music for the first time. They're young enough to not have grown up with it, and so
Yeah.
it's cool. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's good music, even though it may be played out.
Yeah, or it could be an
So,
accessibility point, really, too. Like that is something that you can hear maybe still on the radio or whatever. And so maybe people that are intrigued by the scene or interested, they don't really know how to get into it. It's like that is their point of entry in a way. So, I mean, in that regards, I think that is really cool.
Have you, I know you talked to Victor, you talked about like starting a synthwave night. I'm curious if you've noticed trends recently in the kinds of genres that people like to listen to, and if that's like annoying or you're into it or you wish something else was played more.
yeah, totally. So like cyberpunk mid-tempo dance music is getting a lot of play at Goths.
Interesting. Okay.
At least in Portland. I mean, we're a weird city. I don't know how I don't know if this is a trend all over the place, but it's getting a lot of play here. And I mean, I'm okay with it. Stuff it's hard.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of that here in my experience, at least not mid-tempo stuff. Usually the harder stuff that I hear get played here is more in the agrotech vein where it's pretty hard, pretty fast.
Yeah.
Which annoys me because I tend to be a mid to slow tempo dancer. I don't like to dance to really hard, fast stuff. And I do love cyberpunk as a genre. So it would be nice if I heard more of that played out here. But yeah, we're still, when we're not doing goth, it's usually leaning towards the harsh EBM agrotech side of things, though that has been on a wane to some degree since its heights in the 2010s ish.
Yeah. I did the next thing I was gonna say was of that whole genre. Agrotech, EBM still definitely like makes plenty of appearances, like sprinkled here and there. It's usually older stuff.
I was gonna say, are we talking old school EBM or
okay, like 90s.
That's what I enjoy. Yeah.
But like agrotech, almost zero play. Almost no one ever plays it. Maybe
it got way overplayed in Chicago for a while.
Yeah. I'm really happy to see its sort of decline. I don't want to say gone. I don't mind it. It's an interesting palate cleanser. I like some agrotech songs.
Yeah.
It was just, it'd be like a sprinkling of goth songs and then 2 hours of agrotech.
Yeah, I think
that's a night I'd be hella into.
Yeah. Well, I think it's challenging because it's like the theme nights make a lot of sense. Like I remember Sarah would do like the Back to the Grave and then Noctronica and Nocturna. And it's like really like think that's the way to go because then if that's your flavor of music, then you can go to that and experience that and like dress in that way and like really be in that completely like immersed in that.
Yeah, I know one of the clubs that I DJ at in a much smaller town back in college. It wasn't so much a theme night, though we did do some theme nights, which were kind of out there. But the regular night was 3 music genres. We usually had a goth set, an industrial set, and an 80s set, and that was just the regular thing. So people could get what they want out of the night and enjoy the kind of music they enjoy. But it was just it was a 3-hour night, so three 1-hour sets. And we'd usually rotate. So I would do, I DJ'd all of them at one point or another, and I enjoyed DJing all of them. And then we'd throw in weird theme nights, like we did like a funk night one time and punk nights and stuff like that, where we just really went left field on things, but yeah, the general trend was having those three different genres, which are kind of at least viewed as sort of core with that sort of alternative scene coming out of the 80s. And I thought it was a lot of fun, and it gave a lot of different people something to enjoy on a given night, and then also something to bitch about on the same night. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great formula, and I wish that was like more of a common thing that clubs would do. I think that's amazing.
But it is something you can get on Twitch because you could go on any time of the
Yep.
day and there's a DJ probably with the music you want to listen to, like from some part of the world on. So that is very, very cool, I think.
Yeah, I'm mostly envious of the places that have clubs that have like the multiple floors or the multiple rooms.
Which we
So
do.
you'll-
Like dedicated genres.
Yeah, so you'll have like a goth room, you'll have an industrial room, maybe like a shoegazy type room for a chill out space.
Yeah.
I really am envious of that because I like that sort of one. I like being able to move through spaces and feeling the atmosphere changing, the dynamic, both because of the soundtrack, because of the decor, because of the people there. Being able to just on a single night move through those spaces and feel the dynamics is fun. One of the closest things I had here was very off. Well, kind of not really off, but we had a goth versus disco cruise. And it was in Lake Michigan, and Sarah and William were doing the goth thing on the lower deck of the little ship on Lake Michigan, and the upper deck was the disco space. And I had a great time going to it, and I loved actually going to both. I danced to some Skinny Puppy, then go upstairs and dance to some Donna Summers. It was great.
That's amazing.
We went on one of the goth boats when we were in
Yeah.
Chicago. Yeah, that was a fun time.
Yeah, it was Trust
Yeah.
at sea
Trust
a
is
couple
Oh,
months
yeah.
ago when we visited Chicago.
I think I'm surprised there's still a lot of dark wave being popular, because I thought people would have gotten sick of it by now. But even just last week, my friend Azzy sent me the guy from Daniel Knutz
I was probably saying
the
Newts or Knutes.
Newts. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Brazilian death rock band, but he has an 80s dark wave side project now. And I still hear a lot of it in the clubs. I was looking at the recent festivals here, like Absolution. Well, that was in New York, but Absolution Sanctum Fest, which is coming up, and Cold Waves. And I'm seeing a lot of blending of electronic darkwave bands and goth bands, which usually, at least in my experience for concerts and things, that were not in a big scope like Treffen, it was more focused on a specific genre. But like Absolution had Ultrasun and Nuovo Testamento, and Bellwether Syndicate went. House of Harm was there. I was looking at Sanctum. They've got Lebanon Hanover and Traders, but also like Echo Droids and Qual. And I like to see that. I do think it's cut some of the more harsh stuff off the edges. Like there's not a lot of death rock or like agrotech or
Even industrial.
Yeah. It's kind of like this sort. I guess a lot of the bands have like a pop sensibility in common, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of the more I don't think Bauhaus, they have some catchy poppy songs, but they have a lot of more difficult,
more atmospheric,
artsy songs.
experimental, arty stuff.
And I guess it's a goth club, so it'll kind of trend that way. But even just online on my Spotify and a lot of places, I see a lot more of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like dark wave is the genre that's really thriving in the whole like spooky music spectrum.
Despite no one being able to explain what darkwave actually is.
Yeah, and yet some people say darkwave is dead. They say that too.
That's funny. I
don't
Goth
believe
is
it.
dead too.
Yeah, they say it all.
Yeah, undead. We
we are all.
I just saw a music review the other day that substituted goth subculture with darkwave, but it was like implied that they were talking about the culture, a community, but they said dark wave instead. So to me, that was at least made me think that dark wave as a genre has, because it's kind of catchy in the way that like future pop or synth pop was, it has brought in a wider audience than
Maybe.
goth rock.
Or they're pulling something like Schwarzer scene in
Could be,
Germany,
yeah,
where
could
they're just
be.
emphasizing that it's a dark scene. I don't know. They might be just keying on the dark. I haven't really looked into that very much.
I mean, like, I don't know. It's an interesting topic. Like, you know, it's at some point, the industrial scene got rolled into the goth scene because it wasn't big enough to stand up on its own, and you know, maybe the goth scene wasn't either, and it became goth industrial. And
Right. Yeah, I think both. It came in waves. So, I mean, I think early on, industrial was the small one, and it was riding the coattails of goth in the early to or the mid to late 80s. And then that total dynamic flipped in the 90s, especially after the rise of industrial metal and Nine Inch Nails, and Marilyn Manson put that sort of sound on the map. And then it seemed like the goth scene was sort of riding the coattails of the industrial scene through the 90s.
Yeah. I have complaints about that too, but I do look fondly on the fact that I could be in a space where there was, you know, people in drag, people in lace, and dudes in like camouflage cargo shorts and, Neobouten t-shirt or something. It was a real weird mix, but I think it was additive in some ways. All right, well, let me continue talking about music and change the subject a little bit to this question that we've kind of been...
But everybody loves this question.
It's gotten a little popular.
Scared.
We've been asking people over the last couple years, I would say, to give their take on it. Sort of the way you understand what makes goth music goth, because, you know, when you have a lot of different... We've been talking about a lot of different kinds of music, and very disparate artists. You know, you go Alien, Sex Fiend, Soper Eternus, whatever, Dead Can Dance. What are the components that coalesce to create goth music for you?
We could really get into this one.
yeah,
Into the weeds.
I don't even know if I have a strong opinion on that.
I mean, I've heard everything from we did a book, a Canadian book, where it was like a whole thesis, and their metric was if it gets played in goth clubs.
Right, which was
insane.
Both said was a totally flawed metric.
Yeah,
but
my inclination, I guess, would be that there's some commonality between like a melancholy sound, darker tone or lyrics, and like an acknowledgement of either like loss or pain or suffering in some regards. But I don't know if that's always the case, but I think, I don't know, maybe what ties it together is like this sense of otherness and of like total self-expression. I'm not exactly sure, but maybe that would be the best way I could describe it. There are so many different flavors of goth.
Yeah.
Lots of minor chord progressions.
Yeah.
That's a popular
gated reverb on the snare.
That's just 80s music.
Yeah. And then it's like, well, does the label matter? Like maybe for a band, like putting that label would bring your audience to you. But it also could maybe be isolating, or maybe could be empowering. There's a lot to say about that label itself, I think.
I mean, most bands hate the label, but most bands hate labels in general because it feels that, it restricts their creative, expanse.
It's interesting you say that, because there was, I heard the argument that there are more of the early goth bands that rejected the label than there are, you would say, like in the metal community. A lot of those
Mhm.
bands accept like that we make metal music. And I think there are reasons for that,
But
but
they
I don't
get
know.
pissed if you tell them what kind of metal they make.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the kicker right there.
Yeah, metal's a very different dynamic. But yeah, the debates about death metal, melodeath, tech death,
Mm,
Yeah.
black
Doom.
metal, black gaze, gent, it can get pretty crazy. But you're right, they do stay within this metal umbrella. There's very rarely a complaint about being under that umbrella genre. Whereas, I think and you would often agree as well that goth is also similar. Like it's an umbrella genre. It's not a genre in and of itself. There's just a lot of musics, a lot of different specific genres that fall under this goth umbrella, and it's always been a fascinating question of mine, which is what we started this conversation with: is what puts somebody under that goth music umbrella. We kind of discussed that.
yeah, I actually pulled a quote because last week I watched a video by my friend KB, who has a YouTube channel called Goth Music Latin America, and they were reviewing an album from Corridor Polaco. But in that video, they laid out their qualification of what makes goth music, which I thought was pretty uh, comprehensive. And so they said, and kind of lined up with some of the other people we've had on and asked this question too. They said consistent minor keys, dissonant chords, strong bass line, jangly guitars, spooky synth, and sound that creates an unease. And I would agree with you as well, like throwing in something that's melancholy or bittersweet, this sort of atmosphere.
Yeah, the thematic side of things, the atmospheric side of things, and that does mesh pretty well with. I think Cadaver Kelly has a description she uses as well, which covers a lot of those similar things that this quote from KB mentioned.
Yeah, that totally tracks. I
Mhm.
I think that's legit.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you said about the umbrella because it got me thinking about like the different lineups that we're seeing with bands like now going on tour and how we're like, well, how do those two bands fit together? That's kind of a weird pairing. But like it's kind of like bringing everyone in a way kind of together and like seeing more of the commonalities between maybe these different genres that are still part of the umbrella of goth, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I think I said this a while ago, but I always kind of think of the music scene now as kind of a second coming of the 80s, for at least compared to the waves that I've been in with like the death rock revival, the industrial thing, the cybergoth stuff that got popular. It feels now like in the 80s there was that emphasis on fluidity and experimentation and artistic expression first before trying to fit a specific sound, which is why there's a lot of variety in the bands that get labeled post-punk or goth. And I think there's an embodiment now of that maelstrom of experimentation and fluidity that we didn't really have in the 90s, for example, with all the sisters clones and everything. I think we see a lot of that now, which is, I think, good, but I can understand why it's frustrating to people who or goths, because goths love taxonomies, so I understand why that's kind of frustrating. So I to follow up on that then, let me ask you the other hot topic to call back to that, which is whether or not goth is a music-based subculture. And what does that mean to you? And do you agree with that?
I think that it's very tricky to say yes or no to this question. For
This
me,
is
like
gotcha journalism. Yeah.
for me personally, like fashion, music, it all goes hand in hand. Like I
Mhm.
guess for me, like I wouldn't want one or the other. That would be like a little odd to me because for me they inform the other one. Like I want to like have self-expression because of the music. But also like the fashion inspires me and the music inspires me. It's kind of like a push and pull there, but like when you get into the semantics of it, I think it can get really tricky because then there's all this infighting in the scene and arguments about it. And then like we're all like just becoming so divided when it's like we're already a small subculture to begin with. And if
Yeah.
we all start doing that, like what will be left of us? Like really, what will
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
left?
Yeah.
But I do feel like music is a very important part of it. I just don't think it's all of it. I don't think it's all of it at all, because what if someone, wasn't exposed to the music, like say, I don't know, in another country, maybe they didn't have access, or someone that just didn't have access to the
Sure.
music. Like,
Yeah.
would you say that they weren't allowed to be goth because
Right.
of that? Or like, I don't know, like I met someone that was from Russia and they lived very, very far away. But they were really into like dark music, but they like there was no like goths around them. And they were like, I consider myself part of this subculture. Like I connect here, I fit here. But like they weren't really like around people like that or exposed to like a lot of the music that we maybe are more known for or understand. So it's like what happens then? Like
I
Mhm.
think that's a
where do those people fit?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and it does become a bit reductionist, and kind of exclude the nuance and context. Because I'll hear people say, "Well, it's music based. You don't have to dress goth to be goth," and my immediate reaction is like, "Well, I don't agree with that," but it's also, there are no absolutes really. And I agree to your point that I think for me, the reason why I find goth music to be the core, but not the only aspect of goth is because, is there a cat in here? Oh, hi, Whiskey.
Oh,
She'll maybe come up eventually. But to me,
you'll start.
goth music is like emblematic of everything. You combine the fashion, you combine the morose, macabre aspect, you combine the literature references, and it's this sort of like locus of all these different things coming
Mhm.
together.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt. Sorry, I got excited.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, like in the 1500s, do you think people were like dressed all in black like all the time? It's like, or like dark, or were they, but like there was darkness there, I'm sure, in literature,
Yeah.
in plays, in the way that the music they made, whatever, in words. So like it had to have come from somewhere. Like I believe that it's like always kind of been there to some degree, because I think it's personally like attached to like this concept of death in a way,
Mhm.
or like the concept of suffering or whatever it might be, like because we've always been dying. Like I feel like this
We have
sort of
always
like
been dying.
yes, the embracing of the dark side like has
Yeah,
always
yeah.
been there in some capacity. Is it goth? I don't know, but like it's not like once like the 80s happened like goth just appeared, right? That can't be. Like there had to have been
That's
other
what I would
things, or
say,
like
but that's
when
okay.
maybe
Well, I mean, we're making a
That's okay. We're
but like,
distinction
okay,
between.
Joy Division though,
Yeah.
70s, right? Is
Yeah.
that goth? And then like what
Right, yeah. It's
had to
not
have been,
a
I know there were people
clean
that were more
line.
darkly inclined before that time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there was still like dark music too. It's just like not what we would maybe
Right.
understand it
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah. I think the
Whereas like 80s was like
distinction.
the Mecca, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The distinction always in my mind has been is there some core element of the human experience that is gothic in nature? It leads one to the same themes and ideas and ambiances that we're drawn to as members of the goth subculture. What draws us to that? What is that aspect of the human experience? And that is something that can transcend era and transcend time. That's something that's been, I agree with you, Ophelia, something that's been always with part of the human experience. Now, from Danny's perspective, looking at the capital G goth as the subculture itself, that kind of did have its start, but
Yeah, totally.
it didn't come out of whole cloth. It wasn't invented out of nothing. It wasn't. I mean, it was codified in the 80s.
Yeah.
It was originated in the 80s, but the impulses behind it, the themes it was gathering from, the threads that wove the tapestry that is goth, have been ageless.
Yes.
So I mean, I
Yeah.
kind
I
of
would
view it
totally
that
agree
way.
with that. Because it's like, where were the spaces until the 80s or until those big bands, especially were more mainstream too? Like where was the space?
Yeah.
So I can totally see that.
And
You
if
have
we're
any thoughts,
talking,
Victor? Yeah.
yeah, if we're like, I mean, if we're talking about the goth subculture now, I don't know that I think it is a music-based subculture
Where's the
necessarily.
hang up button? Hang on.
Ooh.
I mean, music is one of the main driving like things
Yeah, the
in
question is what is
subculture.
meant by music based? How
Well,
based does it have to
let
be?
him dig
Yeah.
his own grave. That's very goth. That's okay.
I mean, if, you know, if music wasn't a part of it, I don't know what we would all do together. But
Yeah.
I think more than just having similar taste in music, like there's some much deeper threads that
Mhm.
bring us all into the same scene, and
Yeah.
like there's a lot of shared ideologies in the subculture, and
Yeah.
like, you know, this this goes without saying, but since we're asking the question, I'm gonna say it. Like, there is a pretty universal rejection of social norms and the social expectations, um, found within, you know, people in the goth scene. A lot of us, you know, never fit in, to a normal, to any other scene. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of us are just weirdos, you know, outcasts, and we you know, or we just like think differently, you know, than the average person, or we, you know, operate differently. And um there's a lot of, you know, normal, like, traits of average people in society that you may not find, you know, in the goth community.
Hmm.
Like we approach things differently, and think about things differently, and we don't fit in, and we all kind of found each other. And
The connection of otherness, I think, is a big thing.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Goth
like
is
a
the Isle of Misfit Toys.
yeah, that's a perfect way to say what I'm saying. I think that is, you know, equally, if not more, what the subculture is based around compared to
Mhm.
music.
So like an ethos of self-expression, or the ability to self-express without having that removed from you to fit into a different kind of system kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Or a mix
Yeah.
of that and the sense of alienation of being left out of
Yes.
what everybody else seems to be doing.
Which brings up the hypothetical of what happens if it's no longer
I've
an
only brought that up,
other,
but kind
and
of several times.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
That's always
that's
my thing
another,
is would you do something different than if everybody in the world became goth and your existence was now the normal? Would that lead to an impulse to continue to be counterculture, to continue to be abnormal and, rebel against it by
If
They wouldn't.
if I
It
was a
wouldn't
part
be.
of a culture that I agreed with and was on board with, I don't think
Mhm.
I would
yeah.
Yeah.
have the impulse to rebel. If I just felt
Yeah.
great in the world,
Hmm.
uh, if the mainstream, you know, world out there was something I actually related to and was on board with, I don't think I would need to be a weirdo for the sake of being a weirdo. I'm just a
Right.
weirdo because I'm myself, and that
Hmm.
happens to not be, you know, normal or whatever. But
Right. And
it's
yeah, I
not just
think
for being a rebel's sake.
yeah, and I think that
Yeah.
experience is what informs the attitude, not the desire to be different, but the
Yeah,
experience of being different
Mhm.
and how the world reacts to us and how that makes us feel informs our expression, informs our attitudes and what we seek out in companionship with other like-minded people that we encounter.
totally.
Mm.
And I think a lot of us probably at some point, I certainly did, try to fit in, to
Mhm.
you know, tried to, you know, blend into
Go
society, and
straight.
didn't work.
Yeah.
No, it did not work.
The baseball hat wasn't for you?
No.
You can't fit all this epic hair under it. Let's be
Yeah, I think there's
real.
often like two phases. In my experience, there's often like two phases of that fitting in era as a goth. There's of course the initial era when you're finding yourself and you're a preteen teenager. That initial part where you have those pressures of rebelling or fitting in, and sometimes you'll try to fit in for a while and it just won't work. Then you embrace the weird for a while, late high school, going through college, but then you have to become a quote unquote adult. And that's the second culling of
Yes.
goth. When
The
you
second
when you
culling.
need to become a quote unquote adult and have a job and raise a family and that whole white picket fence, 2.5 kids norm.
2.5.
And there are a lot of people, yeah, I mean, we're goths, so we have to have a whole moment of bisection. So, but that's almost like the second culling that tends to happen when people fall out of the scene to become a productive member of society. And some people do, and some people don't. And then there are the people that will either stay there and just never get back into it, may have those fond memories of their youth, but they're just existing as a I don't know, just a quotidian adult in the world. And then there are those people who, the kids leave home and they're all alone and they get back into it. The people who come back out in their 50s and 60s and start dressing up again and enjoying the freedom of being an older person and not giving a shit anymore what the rest of the world thinks of you. So it's interesting how it can oftentimes go in phases like that. At least that's what I've sort of seen and how I've heard people express things.
Yeah, and I think there's a economic aspect to that as well, when it's like, okay, well, how much of my identity do I need to suppress in order to afford my rent and that kind of thing? And anyway, I could ask another 3 hours of metaphysical questions about this topic, but let's just I'll quote Connor on a previous episode and say goth is a vibes-based subculture, and we'll move on.
Vibes-based subculture.
Yeah,
I think you could probably say that about every subculture.
Yeah.
Certainly today, these days, vibes is a vibes-based subculture these days.
Well, okay, so let me switch topics here and ask about, I guess, staying in the club sphere, the interesting ways that goth clubs can function both as a well, I mean, it is social, but a more personal interaction and as a just go out and dance interaction. And I know, Ophelia, we've talked before about anxiety and social interactions at clubs and the dynamics of that. And I know I've expressed frustration sometimes of wanting to connect to a community that means a lot to me while also struggling with like self-critical anxiety or feeling awkward and that kind of thing. Do you have any thoughts or experiences about that or advice in that arena?
Yeah, I think we're all already connected by just having the interest, like as it were. And I think that it can be just challenging in general to like connect with people in a club setting because there's loud music for one. And like there's a lot of people generally, and like that can be really intimidating, especially if you like really admire maybe someone's fashion or the way they're dancing. Like it can feel like you can't really connect in those spaces. And like I would say like one of my pieces of advice would be to just like literally like realize that you all are already there for the same shared purpose in some regard, and just like to just take the risk and like chat with someone, even if it's just about like their outfit or the music or something like that, and just to like try to find those like connection points as like maybe mundane as they seem, because I think there's already a reason like you're all together, and maybe like people will just connect more going to like a different activity that's not a club. I mean, I think there's like, at least we have like some really cool events where it's like we like do goth takeovers of places or something like that. Or we've done like cemetery picnics or like gone to the mausoleum or something like that, where it's like there's more of an opportunity to have more of an in-depth, like interesting conversation. Because like at least for me, what I can't stand is like all the small talk that happens like a
Yeah.
lot of people. And I don't mean like someone coming up to you, like I just said, and like complimenting you and trying to get to know you. Just like people you may know, just like talking about the weather, like just like randomly talking about things. Like it really drains me.
Yeah.
And it can give me anxiety too, of being like, especially us, because like everyone knows Victor, like everyone on the face of the planet of Portland knows Victor. I don't know how. It's like we can't go anywhere without being recognized. Like the grocery store, the car wash, wherever we go, everyone knows him, and like by proxy me. And so it can be like it's cool in a way, but like it's very draining because like I would like to
Yeah.
have more in-depth conversation like we're having now.
Yeah.
And so like how do we get beyond that? I think maybe being vulnerable and real and just being like, I actually have had a lot of anxiety maybe about this. I have
Yeah.
anxiety talking to you, but I would like to talk to you. And I think that can like really make
Oh,
people,
if somebody
I
said
don't
that to
bring
me, that
people
would be great.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring people
Yeah.
down though to that level and just
Yeah.
be like, yeah, we're all human or vampires, whatever. But we're
Yeah.
mostly
Even
maybe
vampires can be
human.
anxious.
Yeah, that's a good tagline. Even vampires can be anxious. I mean, that's a good one.
So I guess my one thought about the social anxiety part that I've noticed watching a lot of goths on TikTok. Are people talking outside again? I can't hear through my head. Hang on, I'm gonna close it.
Goths on TikTok.
Yeah,
It's a
so
funny
I
catchphrase.
think I have a TikTok specifically to only subscribe to goths, so I can scroll through and see what everybody's doing.
Mm,
Um,
fine.
but yeah, I think there's a post-pandemic kind of, not post-pandemic, but post-lockdown, a kind of, and I've read some articles about this, but I like a learned loneliness where you take the sort of, as an introvert, I need time alone to recharge and do some self-care. But I think it goes to a farther degree, to the point where you isolate yourself from your community, any kind of in-person connection, and it goes beyond like what self-care would be to actually being detrimental to your mental health. And the longer I've found, the longer that I do stay home and don't go out, the easier it becomes to stay
Yeah.
here, and the more comfortable and the more difficult it is.
Inertia's a bitch.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've experienced that, not maybe not for yourselves, but as far as the like the turnouts or the regulars, turnover, and like who comes out to events, that kind of thing.
I feel that for myself big time. I could super relate with that. I think it's a psychological trap that people just kind of, I don't know, it's like I don't want to say it's human nature, but it's seems like a natural sort of progression of people in our culture as we get older to become less and less connected to others and you know, more attached to being comfortable, wanting to stay in our comfort zones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that well, that was, when we were talking about or when Ophelia was talking about events-based scenes. I used to notice that when we did have more regular DJ nights, you would go to a concert and you would see all of these alternative people that had never seen anywhere else come out, that were usually 40s and up. So I do think there is that sort of, you lose that social connection for whatever reason. There's all kinds of reasons, obviously, but once that happens, it is more difficult to regain that.
Yeah, it's hard to just go out just for the sake of going out. You need a good, solid, strong reason sometimes.
Totally.
To overcome the hurdle.
Yeah, I think the pandemic affected people in more ways than we even comprehend still. At least for
Yeah.
me, it was like a very bad time.
Mm.
Like I can be introverted, and like just not even having the option, I think, to go out, at least for me, because we stayed in probably longer than a lot of people, for
Yeah.
years, and being so immersed in the scene, and then going from 100 to nothing.
Yeah.
It was very bizarre and very isolating. And when you're in survival mode, like you're not necessarily thinking about like going out and like, having
Yeah.
fun. Like you're just like surviving literally. And I think that that isolation that we all experience to some degree, of course, some people like kind of were still they were still going out during it, but
Yep.
like largely we all were experienced the isolation. We all were impacted by it in some way, and I don't think everyone's recovered from that. So like trying to be aware of that and kind of be gentle with ourselves that like
Mm.
that's okay, and we're like we were experiencing like unprecedented times,
Yeah.
and there's going to be a period where we're just going to like have to figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that there's way more of a focus right now on mental health, at least like in a lot of the spaces we frequent,
Hmm.
and online too. I think that's a really great positive thing.
Yeah.
It's nice that it's at least okay to talk about mental health now, whereas
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I'm really happy that that's becoming an acceptable and even like encouraged topic to discuss, whereas before, in the past, like people, I don't know, where I just feel like it used to not get talked about as much. People would privately deal with their issues that they were experiencing and kind of shove it to the background and try
Mhm.
to not burden other people with it or
Yeah.
whatever.
I always found in the goth scene it was easy to talk about the negative emotions, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing, but it was more of a therapy through just saying how you feel, whereas now I feel like people are more into, what can you do about it? How do you individually and as a community support each other to heal and like progress and like encourage each other, instead of remaining in a kind of perpetual I'm just depressed and I'm continue to be depressed and I can, which is like chronic illness is a thing, but I think
Yeah.
working through tools and methods and ways to combat that, I think a lot more people are talking about, which is good.
Yeah.
And didn't come from the goth scene. I think that's more of a general
Yeah.
population thing, which is one of the
Totally.
things I always point to about how whenever I hear the goths that are like, oh, we're more enlightened than other, and it's like even with like queer stuff, I think a lot of that became more acceptable in goth spaces because it was more acceptable in the general population too. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
I think it is all tied together for sure. And because we are, I would say, more of an inclusive space for people and like allow people to more be themselves and really experiment with self-expression, it would make sense that it would be really tied into our scene itself, as opposed to maybe some other scenes.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I have, let's maybe do like a couple more questions and wrap up. And these are more just to get a little flavor from each of you individually. So the first would be about your band, Victor, which is called The Secret Light. And I have been listening to your music the last few weeks and I love it.
Oh,
I
thank
would
you.
describe it as this like blend of sort of Cure-esque melodies and synth pop sensibilities that create this. Uh, it really lifts my mood. It's really effervescent. Like I feel good listening to it, which is
That's great.
good for me right now because I'm very sad. So
Mhm.
I wanted to ask, just how did the band come together? What was that like? What do you get out of this music process yourself?
Oh, well, I'm really happy to hear that the music lifts your mood. That's like the best thing I could ever hope for.
Oh.
The bassist I met in the Exploding Boys, the Cure tribute band, we used to play quite a bit when the band was still together. And the band was together for like 15 years or something.
Oh, wow.
It was a long running Cure tribute. The guitarist was in my old band, Pink Noise, and then we all kind of started forming a new band together. And we write, the way we come up with music is maybe a little more diplomatic than a lot of other bands. Like most bands have like a songwriter
Yeah.
who writes most of the stuff, and we've been very diplomatic about our songwriting. Like we'll jam a whole bunch and record it, and then listen back to our jam session and pick out little bits that stand out, and then recreate those like magic moments on
cool.
purpose.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then kind of go from there. Yeah, I don't know. For me, I'm just kind of trying to make music that I want to listen to. Blending a bunch of elements of, dark wave and post-punk and like future pop, which you'll hear that more on the newer stuff that isn't out yet.
Okay, well, I'm excited about that. Future pop needs to make a comeback, even though everyone I know doesn't like future pop. But
I make more of a stink about how much I dislike future pop. I don't hate future pop nearly as much as I sometimes make it out to. It was the end of my era of favorite 90s goth industrial thing. Future pop was sort of the first change for me of music moving in a direction I didn't want it to, per se.
Yeah. Well, and see, for me, when I was like 2000, 2001, when I was getting music off of Kazaa or LimeWire, I'd get a folder of hundreds of bands, and it was like goth or whatever, and it was all like A-pop and V&V and Assemblage 23,
right?
And like, so that was like that's what I really got into.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is that. And I made a joke about this on a previous episode about how goth music doesn't have enough fun. Like sometimes I'll listen to music in the car with my wife, and she'll be playing pop music, and that's when I really hear the stark contrast of like, my music is actually very sad, and I'm just in it so much that I don't realize it. And yeah, future pop it makes me feel happy, and I need to feel happy sometimes.
That's awesome.
It's valid.
Yeah.
What one thing I really break with future pop on is I use a shitload of vocal effects. So
okay, yeah,
that's a thing you don't like about
And his stage performance is epic. Like, they always have fog and like really awesome lights, and he plays keytar, everyone.
Hell
yeah.
Yep. Hell
He
yeah.
has a wall of guitars you can't
unironically play guitar.
I love that.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I've seen a keytar, but that's exciting to me.
It's very exciting.
Well, I'm the synth player, but also like the lead singer. So
yeah,
I wasn't gonna stand behind a keyboard. That's not gonna work.
I've been to it was only a couple bands I remember specifically, but I've been to industrial shows where there was really it's Agrotech, the one guy on the mic, and then somebody in the back plugged in a iPod and hit play, and then was just kind of there.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if you do what you got to do.
We could get into that.
I mean,
there's
that's
so many. Since he does live sound all the time, he's kind of ruined shows for me a little bit. I gotta say, because he'll be like, they're not. He's like, they're not really playing their instrument. They just have a laptop. They're not even doing. Are they even singing? Like, that's a backing track, and I'm like, oh my god! And it's like some bigger names too, and like now. I don't know. I have a hard time like enjoying concerts because I'm like,
well, yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion about that, because I I get both sides. The other side of that being the person who's like, what I care about is entertainment value. So if I'm having fun, that's what matters. But I also get the other side of it. So like, what is that? Like there's probably more of a techie kind of thing for you as well. But how do you feel about the performances we see? Because I don't know if you've been to a lot of concerts outside of the scene, but I found they're very different technically and performance wise. So
weirdly not a lot now that you mention it. I'm in this world, I'm so deep in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there's the scene is thriving right now.
Yeah.
The live music, like goth spectrum scene. In a post pandemic, or I should say post lockdown and pre lockdown, it's like night and day. I mean, there was a lot of stuff coming up before the pandemic, but you know, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's that a lot of music got made during the pandemic, and then once the bands were finally able to tour, like it just started going crazy, and all the fans are like hungry to go do stuff. So attendance has been great. And there's just a lot of enthusiasm on both the fans and the band, the artist side. Yeah, there's a lot of live music happening right now in the scene, and it's really awesome. But yeah, going back to the iPod thing.
Go off.
I mean, no one really uses iPods anymore for the
No.
backing tracks, but like backing tracks are the major part of the live scene in the goth world. Live drummers are kind of a rarity now in the scene.
I don't know if that's new. I mean, drum machines have been part of the scene since their inception.
Yeah.
Especially in the EBM and industrial side of it. But, you know, Dr. Avalanche,
yes,
prime member of Sisters of Mercy.
Absolutely.
And his nurse, whoever that happens to be, the person we don't care about.
I took a lot of video of that person. We went to see him a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was like, what is that guy doing?
We called him Nigel.
Yeah.
I don't know. He was just like
most of the time he was standing there with his arms folded. At first he was a security guard.
Yeah, that's what I
And
thought.
then I was like, oh wait, he's Dr. Avalanche's operator.
You could see him through all the fog? I'm surprised.
Oh, there wasn't that much fog.
Oh, really?
Wow, really?
Yeah, you could see everything very clearly.
What happened?
I bet Eldritch wasn't happy about that.
He seemed a little over it, I have to say. But
I just saw a video of him, not the last tour, but this tour. There was some woman in the crowd that was yelling his name all night, and eventually he got fed up and he told her to shut up, and then he was like, and if you don't understand why, and he points to the band, which is like, you know, listen to the music, stop yelling at me, you know. But
I guess what is the point of going to a show? Like, why would anyone pay for a show versus just listening to the band in their home? Like, I think that's an interesting question, because like if they really are just going up there with a laptop and dancing around, is that enough? Like, is it the people you're around in the crowd? Is it just the ambiance or like the stage performance? Is that enough? Or like, do you want to see someone playing live music versus just listening to something on Spotify? Like, what is it?
I want Peter Murphy to spit in my mouth. That's what I don't know what anyone. No, that's
You're
why
not the only one.
That's why I really like. I'm gonna forget his name. The guy from Ego Likeness and
Steven Archer.
Yeah, like his live stuff is like a lot of modular synths and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of performances, and also with modular synth, obviously you don't get the same thing every time, which is
it's a lot of generative.
cool layer.
Yeah, his stage setup it's crazy. It's like I don't know, peeking behind some panels on side of a Borg cube. Like he's got cables going everywhere and all this different gear plugged in. Yeah, he puts on a hell of a show.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different kinds of shows, and I Yeah, I do. I like to go see bands play their music live. Sure, I enjoy seeing live music being played. I enjoy the craft of watching a musician do their thing. But sometimes I like the extra production that you just can't do with a small band because you're making a song out of many layers of sounds and you're making this sort of sound collage, and obviously it's really hard to regenerate that live at a show, but I'd still like to see those bands in
Well,
person live. And really, for me, as far as going to see a live show, I'm more just about what is the show doing? What is the live presence adding to it? If that's them playing the instruments live, cool. If it's a great lighting and stage and a spectacle of pyrotechnics or laser show or all that, that's cool too. Is it great costumes and set design and dancers and stuff like that? All of that's great. I mean, I think of bands like Kraftwerk, which is all about the visual side of it. They're not really, I mean, yeah, they're playing their instruments, the playing the way they play. It's not a dynamic performance of playing instruments. They're not jumping around and dancing. They're behind their pedestals with their synths and their drum machines, but they have this great light show and visual display happening around them and their outfits and just the ambiance there, versus something like a Parliament Funkadelic, which is all about the playing of the music, the improvisation, the sort of jazz funk blend is just, I love both of those things, but I want the I want the show to be in something additional to, like you said, Ophelia, just listening to it on Spotify. If it sounds exactly like the record and they're not doing anything on stage that's entertaining me, it's a bust. But even if it's all backing tracks, as long as they're doing something in addition to that that's going to entertain me, I think it's worth my time to go out and see it live personally.
And there's a whole a social connection, cultural
yeah.
aspect to shows too.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier, there's a lot of people who um don't just for whatever reason going out to a dance club is just not their thing, but they'll totally come out to see a band that they like, and it brings a lot of people out, and it's a unique experience to, especially like the time like between the bands when you can actually chat with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I generally agree with you guys too. I like, if I think back to when I was younger and going to a lot more metal shows and other whatever, ska, emo, whatever. What I enjoyed was the fact that the live performance sounded different, and sometimes it was better than the album. Sometimes it was worse, but that yeah, that live human aspect of it is adds something, I think.
Totally.
Well, so then Ophelia, let me ask you a question, because one thing I really like about you is your artistic incorporation into the sort of goth sensibilities. You know, you have your coffee book, and one of the more interesting things to me is the doll tarot. So I wanted to ask, I guess, two questions. Sort of, can you explain what doll tarot is? And then also, the cats are fighting, sorry. Also, do you find that your spiritual beliefs or esoteric practices influence your goth identity or vice versa?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, the doll tarot idea came about because my best friend and I had been well, one, we're into creepy dolls because hello. But also we're both into tarot, and we just were really intrigued that we would give people readings, especially people that at least were semi familiar with the concept of tarot. Like we
Mm-hmm.
would give them readings from a deck. And then if certain cards would come about, they would freak out. They'd be like, it's the tower, everything's good. And they just would stop listening, and they would just panic, and or they would start interpreting the cards and reading them.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's fine. But we were like, we wonder if there's like a more creative way where we could get the messages across to
Mm.
people and also incorporate like our love for like old things and like creepy things and make it more like really like aesthetically pleasing and also have a kind of psychological aspect. That's what I've realized as time has gone on, that it has that component as well. So we like found this like house on Craigslist that was like a child's like doll house, and we spray painted it black. It's like a Victorian looking house. And then we found all of these like creepy little vintage dolls from like Goodwill and like
Hmm.
various places. They're all from this like Dolls of the World series, so they're supposed to represent like different countries.
Okay.
And you used to be able to get them like from the gas station for like 50 cents or like 80 cents or whatever, like back in the day, like 50s, 60s.
Hmm.
And so we took them and we kind of put like the different archetypes within the doll. And so they each have like a name and like a meaning, but then I would also say there's like they each have their own individual like spirit behind them too. So how a session would work is someone would sit down at my table and like ask a question they would have. Like some people want to know, you know, about their love life, career, maybe something that's happening in the next year, but some people ask like a whole variety of questions that are pretty unexpected. Like they
Hmm.
might be like, I had an alien encounter when I was 18. Can you tell me more about
Hmm.
it?
Hmm.
Or like just like all sorts of like different things that I've gotten. So they would ask the question and then they get to pick the doll that they think has the answer from the house.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then we
Okay.
do the reading based on that interaction. So what I've found is
Oh,
like it's pretty empowering because for one, they're making the choice for
yeah.
themselves of like which doll they want to choose. And then there's like an energy exchange there. And then like we do the reading, and it's usually like very dynamic and like different, but there's definitely some commonalities between like some of the readings there. So that's just like how it looks for a
Hmm. I
session.
love that.
Yeah. And then as far as like it kind of intertwining with my spirituality or like the goth subculture, I grew up in like a very religious family. Like my mom was like really, really super religious and still is to this day. So I was like
Same.
very, very oppressed, and it was very hard for me because everything I was doing was evil. She would
Hmm.
like exercise me and do all this like insane stuff, and I was like forced to go to church for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that impacted me as far as like otherness goes, for one, and then just also like diving even deeper into like the dark side of things. And I, for the longest time, just thought like I didn't have a spiritual side really. I was very like anti-religion,
Hmm.
and like I didn't really feel like there was a place for me within that world. Until I discovered like a lot of like more of like an esoteric magical practice. And I think it looks different for different people. But for me, I find that like there's magic all around us, and it's just how you choose personally to interact with that magic that is there. And so I still don't really usually like connect well with like a, I don't know, like an organized sort of religion type thing. Whereas
Yeah.
like even like doing like big rituals, sometimes it's not really my jam. Like I
Hmm.
do more of like personal practice or like with like a small group or whatnot. But I find that there's lots of like threads to the goth
Trauma.
subculture. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to say about that because I
Yeah.
think if you look at like a lot of like goth music lyrics, like there's some like magical shit going on in there. Like some
Yeah.
people have been like really like deep into this world, and I mean just the fact that in the magic community you are experiencing like a lot of like very interesting commonalities between this world, this realm, and like the dream world or
Mm.
supernatural world,
Hmm.
those sorts of things. There's so much to say about that, and there's more of a encouragement of one's own power and like one's own
Hmm.
magic. And I think that there's just a lot of that comes about in self-expression, in music, in art, in fashion, all of that. I think it's tied together. And for me, they're very closely linked. And I think there can be a lot of empowerment in that realm for people, and just like a lot of more in self-exploration too, and self-expression.
I love that. Okay. Do we end with the gotcha journalism? That is,
we can do that. Yeah.
In one sentence, is Cybergoth goth? No.
Oh no.
Well, going back to what we said, what we were saying earlier, that goth is an umbrella term for a culture. Absolutely. It's goth.
Sure. When I edit in poser exposed. Big
hey, that's fine. That's fine.
No.
It has goth in the name.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it's under the umbrella, but like if you were to look at trad goth and like that, it's like complete polar opposite, right? But I mean, they did really well in the pandemic because they had their masks. And they were more prepared than anyone else, let's be real, for any kind of apocalyptic situation. But we actually did
glow sticks for when the power goes out.
Yeah. We did a Cybergoth night not long ago. Just to see. We were like, what's gonna happen?
Like we're both super into
like like stripper dancing, and like we were like, let's just see what happened. It was a Wednesday. It sold out, and people got. Wow. It was like 2010 again.
Yeah,
like early 2000s. People were like all dressed up.
Were they bringing out the goth dance moves?
They did. Oh, yes. They did the classic.
The Pong.
Yeah, the Pong. We played Pong. We had.
Of course, yeah.
You had to play Pong. It was so good. But I don't know. That's not really an answer, but it is.
No, that's all right. I'll allow it. on my podcast.
Like, sadly, cybergoth is kind of gone away. It's you see it emerge every once in a while. There's some people still hanging on. I'm
honestly surprised it didn't make
one of them.
We're here.
Bigger comeback.
Cybergoth.
Yeah.
Here we go.
No, I'm honestly surprised it didn't make a bigger.
Wait to 2040. 2040. That's 30 years. Cybergoth will come back big in 2040.
That's your prediction. You're putting it now in stone.
I'm putting it in stone.
It's gonna be forever.
Have you guys tour our retirement homes and play all the aggro tech we can't hear anymore?
Oh yeah, you can still feel it.
All right. Well, can you both share your socials, like where we can find your personal stuff, your music projects, whatever you want to direct people to, and I'll link that in the show notes as well.
You can find me at Ophelia Darkly. That's where you can find me on like Facebook and Instagram. I have a link tree as well. And then twitch.tv/Ophelia Darkly as well. I stream every basically Tuesday morning. I say Monday night because I haven't gone to bed yet on Twitch, and then Thursday night too.
Yeah, we can wait till
Victor Nova.
We can wait till he gets back. This is why there have been more than one occasions, because we don't ever do video.
Yeah,
there have been more than one occasion where I've muted myself and peed in the empty cup of beer that I was drinking because there was no possible way I could break the flow of the conversation.
Gosh. Thanks for revealing that.
Break.
Yeah, that's getting edited out, so I'm not worried about that.
I don't often break.
Well, when we're doing
the recordings, so I'll usually just have a random conversation with the person while some people are out and doing a break.
Yeah, I try and enforce them, but sometimes it's like we do a 3-hour, 4-hour thing, and there's like 5 people, everybody's flowing through conversation. I don't feel like I can.
Yeah, I just have a huge bladder, so I'm fine.
Depending on the venue I'm at, sometimes, because I don't necessarily feel comfortable in men's bathrooms all the time, so sometimes I will just literally dehydrate myself all day, which is not great, but no. I'm like, I'm not going to the bathroom, so
yeah.
I mean, I rarely go to the bathroom at clubs, though I also don't drink at all.
All right, let's talk about how much we eat shit now. Who wants to go first on that one? So then, yeah, well, so Victor, where can people find your personal stuff, your music projects online?
So you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Victor Novatron, Viktor Novatron. And you can find my band, The Secret Light, we're on Bandcamp, thesecretlight.bandcamp.com. You can also just go to our website, thesecretlight.com, or find us on Spotify, all the other music platforms as well.
Fantastic. Well, this was so much fun. Thank you both for your time, but it's also like I haven't seen you, Ophelia, in a while, and Victor, you're fantastic. I'm really happy we got to chat. Would love to hang out in the future. But yeah, thank you both for spending time with us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you both.
It was so awesome to like chat with the both of you. Like, there's so much to say about this, so I really appreciate being able to be on
It's a
the podcast.
Good talk.
Yeah.
Good talk.
Good talk. Good talk. Good
It's
talk.
just interesting.
I love
like,
you, son.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can also find me on Twitch. My weekly new goth spectrum music DJ show is every single Monday starting at 8 p.m. Pacific time. It's about a 4-hour show with me and my co-host, co-DJ C. Wraith every single Monday. And that is at twitch.tv/Victor Novatron. And it's all like fresh stuff that's come out within the past 5 years, like highly curated. There's a lot of stuff that we have to sift through to pick out the good stuff. So yeah, if you want to hear some new music, come find me there.
I'm back with a few final thoughts to wrap up this episode. I want to share with you a few things, who our next guest will be, talk a little bit about what I've been listening to recently, and share a few post-show musings about the consistent distinctiveness of goth, which we sort of touched on in the episode. I should probably first mention that I will not be putting out another video episode of the podcast next month, which also happens to be our last episode of the year, obviously, but the episode before our hiatus. So in January, there will not be a Cemetery Confessions episode, although we are going to do something in January, which I'll get to in a moment. I do want to say how much fun I had putting the last 2 video episodes together, especially this episode, because I learned a lot after the first one and used some new video editing software. And I really had a great time. You know, I would like to do more video content like that, video episodes and Cemetery Confession YouTube videos in a different kind of format as well. You know, I was thinking it would be nice to like upgrade my 12-year-old webcam, maybe get some wireless microphones, get some actual appropriate mood lighting, that kind of thing. That is a bit of a distant dream at the moment, though, which is probably a good place to segue into mentioning our Patreon. As it stands right now, my wife and I are both currently unemployed. I'm unemployed because my company not my company, the company I worked for about 12 years went bankrupt. And my wife is unfortunately now unable physically to work due to an increase in severity of her various disabilities. So this has put us in a pretty precarious situation, scrambling to pay our bills, kind of being in the negative, even just paying for basic necessities. So especially now, absolutely any support you might be willing to provide or able to provide through Patreon will literally mean we can potentially avoid having to sell our home if I don't find a job soon enough. So, you know, aside from that sort of like catastrophic, difficult situation we're in, back to what I mentioned earlier, We won't have an episode publishing in January because we take a little hiatus every year to kind of collect ourselves, plan out the rest of the year, that kind of thing. Trey and I do host a Patreon only Zoom chat for 3-4 hours, sometimes longer, 5 hours, where anyone who's on Patreon that wants to can spend a few hours chatting with us. And it has been an absolute blast every time we've done it. I always mean to do it more often, but I always make sure we at least do it during this hiatus period. So if you would like to be part of that and hang out with Trey and myself and all of our incredible Patreon supporters, you can do that at the lowest level, just $1 a month. And you can do that over at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. And I sincerely appreciate everyone who even just pauses this video to go over there and take a look. But obviously everyone who has supported us over the years, and a heartfelt thank you to everyone who continues to support us right now. So let me get into some thoughts about this episode. I think there's a couple probably prominent topics that I wanted to expound upon. As I was editing, I realized I presented two seemingly opposing views during our discussions about music, where I said both that there's a lot of dark wave in the scene right now that is very pop friendly and has sort of filed down the rough edges of goth music. And then later I said that the scene today is kind of a second coming of the 80s in the sense that there's an explosion of experimentation and genre, and those seem to be kind of incongruent with each other, so I want to explain a little bit. I do think the vast majority of what I hear in clubs, but also importantly on TikTok, in Spotify playlists, YouTube playlists, whatever, talked about in social media groups, is dark wave or classic 80s stuff, but lots of dark wave. Historically, I think it is true that the larger share of whatever is played most often within the goth scene is more oriented towards dance music, more immediately catchy kind of melodies, or having a more simplistic time signature, a more traditional song structure, because that's easier to dance to at a club or in your car. It's more. But that's not to say that there isn't other kinds of music being produced. You know, I immediately think of like Batcave Productions or Manic Depression Records or Aufnahme Wiedergaben or Icy Cold Records. There's lots of record labels out there. You know, those are what Swiss Dark Knights, you know, they're in France, they're in Poland, all over the place. And they are still putting out really interesting experimental music. And I think there really is an embarrassment of riches right now among goth. I do wish I had more time to put out another Music Mausoleum episode where I kind of go through a dozen albums and share recommendations, what I like about them, and provide the sort of eclectic mix of new and upcoming goth bands. Unfortunately, I just haven't had time to do that myself. And in addition to that, my listening habits have kind of been all over the place. So I've been listening to a lot of Mexican music, Mexican goth music, and Latin American music more broadly, because they've been killing it for forever now. I just saw a new release from the band Deliverance, which was fucking awesome. It's this creeping, like very 90s sounding goth rock that I really enjoyed. I've been listening to Dist, who we actually had Danny from that band on the show in the past. And they're this great, like, unhinged death rock band. One of the things I noticed as well is that there's a swath of bands that are invoking the classic 80s bands. So Sea Lungs, for example, sounds a lot like Christian Death. Coffin Moth sounds a lot like Bauhaus. Blind Dreams is pulling from Joy Division. But my listening habits have also been all over the place outside of goth as well. Like, I've been listening to lots of dungeon synth. I've been listening to lots of Mexican punk and ska bands like La Plebe or Los Tres Puntos. I've been listening to a lot of video game soundtracks. If I'm in like a cyberpunk mood, I'll listen to the soundtrack from The Ascent, or I've actually weirdly been listening to a lot of the Ultima Online soundtrack for some reason. Very kind of like cheesy medieval music, and lots of feminist anarcho-punk like War on Women and Limp Wrist. I'm still really into darkwave. I still enjoy my French Police, my Harsh Symmetry, give my remains to Broadway, John Stinson's, that kind of thing. And I still try and find stuff that's like ethereal and shoegaze, at least in some sort of inspiration of that, like Vivi and the Void, SRSQ, I said it right this time, Delphine Coma to some degree, Bel Canto put out a new album this year, that kind of thing. So I am grateful that there is so much good music out there, and I wish there was a broader diversity reflected in the general like discourse, not even necessarily in goth clubs, because I think that will always have a certain pastiche, I guess might be the word I'm looking for. But yeah, I kind of wanted to, what's the phrase, square the circle on those couple comments that I noticed that I made. One of the other, or I guess the other primary subject I wanted to broach that I have had knocking around in my head for a while was this notion of consistent distinctiveness. So we started the episode comparing communities between cities. What is goth like in Chicago? What is goth like in Portland, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason for that is one of the first books I read on goth years and years ago was this book by Paul Hodkinson, which he laid out his definition of subculture and the various qualities of the goth scene. And one of those qualities he argues for is consistent distinctiveness, meaning that there are socially significant values, aesthetics, identity markers, and other compatible factors that are shared among goths regardless of location or time period. And not to say that every scene is the same, but relatively there's an identifiable distinctiveness and consistency that still manages not to obscure the dynamism of goth. And that's a concept that stuck with me over the years, as it shows up in my homology hypothesis that I have here on YouTube, sort of explaining how to define and understand what goth is. And we've kind of explored the nuances and counter arguments of this concept. I still like the idea of consistent distinctiveness, but I've moved away from the core of that argument, which largely stems from a kind of Hebdige versus Muggleton analysis, or division between modern versus postmodern analysis of subcultural groupings. And that's a big oversimplification. I know Hebdige had a recent book talking about how his framework had been misrepresented over the years. I should have it right here on my computer, actually. It's called Hebdige and Subculture in the 21st Century Through the Subcultural Lens. And I've only read the first chapter of that, unfortunately, but I am looking forward to finishing that book to kind of understand the division here, because I broadly agree with that broad conceptual framing of consistent distinctiveness, but you kind of have to back up a few steps into the sort of metaphysics, the ontological framing of the theory. And as of the last few years, I've been more aligned with a flat ontology, which is an approach that actor network theory is based on largely, for example, which is largely attributed to Latour, or and an activist approach. The idea is that all organisms and objects are ontologically actors and are networked together, that entities aren't contained within each other. It's non-hierarchical, and are instead understood through their relationships with each other. So there are no a priori entities, or in another way to say that is there is no at bottom undergirding foundational stuff, essentialist pre-given thing. For example, ways this shows up is questions about technology and culture, and the questions of like, is technology driving culture? Did the internet change Goth? Did Goth change technology? Those questions they're the wrong question to ask, because there isn't an essence or core or prime mover to social change. So this is a different approach. Even though this is within sociology, it's different from like the CCCS framing, or the postmodern framings even, or whatever you want to look at, structural functionalism, because we're talking about a flat ontology where agents are not contained within a nation or a parent culture or a narrative that in some way has this one directional relationship to the agents. The outcome here is the idea that culture, goth, people, music are not static categories, but fluid and ever-changing assemblages of entities based on ever-evolving relationships and negotiations and reciprocal interactions. For me, this does away with the tension that Hodkinson finds between individualism and coherency that he's trying to resolve. And it's that question of like the classic, we are all individuals, but we all have the same boots. Because this framing presents the social as always dynamic and something that doesn't stand alone or against a different domain. It is co-constructed with nature and technology and history and concepts. There's no distinction between domains. So there's no metaphysical distinction between entities that are human or non-human, or conceptual or physical. So when we ask these questions of how do coalitions of the social form and break apart and work together, because we normally function from this metaphysical dichotomy of nature and culture, we lean towards a sort of reductionism to find what is at the root. Where is the prime mover? What is causing these changes? And Hodkinson points this out in his book, sort of as we joked about in this episode, of Goths loving taxonomies so much, and the tendency in Goth to create these groups of like things, these groups of in-groups and out-groups, and fashion taxonomies, and then sort of argue about what is and isn't transgressing those. Hodkinson points at that, and to his credit, he resists and disagrees with the reductive essentialism that's implied in homology, the idea that Goth fashion somehow belies a universal meaning. For example, the sort of semiotic approach. Hodkinson instead tries to focus on experience of subculturalists rather than a priori assumptions. However, to Hodkinson, at least in my interpretation of his book, which again is fairly old at this point, Goth fashion still functions as a universal signifier of difference to distinguish the individual from the culture around them, to draw these lines of in-group and out-group. And I think this is problematized even more obviously today, and something we have touched on in previous episodes about the difficulty of identifying a goth now, because the prevalence of fashion signifiers in goth are being used outside of that community. And so that multiplicity of lived experience problematizes the abstraction of a singularity. When we exist in day-to-day life, we don't really think about things in this sort of mono-naturalistic modern sense of things. We don't isolate cultural analysis from scientific analysis. We speak about highly complex issues in a quilted together manner. Goth music isn't just understood as noise that is measurable through the scientific process of hertz and sound waves. It's not just an expression of self or culture. It is contingent on environment, the entities that are engaged in its co-creation, and the broader historical context, the networks that it is within. There is no neat delineation there, and we don't talk about concepts in that way either. So it's a question of how order emerges, how assemblages of relational heterogeneous plenums, to borrow a term, or more plainly, socio-material networks, how are they held together, or how do they break apart or distinguish themselves? And I think in a practical sense, the idea that there are no predetermined hierarchies in this sort of actor network theory sense, this flat ontological sense, has a big impact on how we think about ourselves, how we think about goth. When we look at entities as having equal footing metaphysically, it changes the way that we perceive the world, obviously. And I think what it does when we talk about what is and isn't goth music, or we try to approach something from a fundamentalist perception, or we talk about the problems we see in the community with racialized goths, or the way gender is understood, or even just what qualifies as goth, what is goth, it becomes more accessible. Change becomes more accessible, specifically because we can understand that we can modify what goth is, what our communities are, because they are situated within a relationship to time and place and environment and history, et cetera, these networks that are immediate and relational, rather than a sort of underlying, overarching, essentialist, homogeneous structure. Goth is provisional. It is not fixed or static. And that empowers us to be able to see change, rather create change, and see the change that we create, and build a better world, in a very corny way to say that. So short break just to show one of my cats that is asleep on our heating pad, because how could I not show that adorable photo? That's what's happening in the other room. So all that to say, that's my sort of philosophical verbal diarrhea for today. There may be more of that in the future. I'm sorry if this was a sort of half-baked thought that I had in my head, something I just wanted to get out there, and hopefully wasn't too confusing. So finally, then, I will move away from that and sort of give a preview of our next episode and the episode beyond that, actually. So our next episode will be an interview with Chanelica, who you may recently have heard of through their video called Goth is White. And you may have been familiar with them previously anyway, because they have a lot of very good quality video essays, and I love a video essay. Let me tell you, the number of hours I've spent watching video essays, for one example, among obviously social and other subjects, is lost, uncountable. So we're going to be having them on to talk primarily about that video, although we'll talk about other subjects. So topics may include colorism, the notion of being white passing and how that impacts Goth fashion and identity, the importance of anti-colonial and anti-racist work in subculture, and talking about what the consequences of avoiding that are, or remaining ambiguous or apolitical on that are. I want to chat with them about their opinions on goth music as well. That was a big contentious part of that video. And talk about why it is or isn't a basis for subculture, what the arguments for and against that are, what goth music even is, how do we understand that. I have a lot of thoughts beyond. I know we sort of talked about that in this episode, but I have other thoughts beyond that. And Chanelica makes arguments that were not really included here as well. And I'd love to hear from them and sort of have that dialogue. And hopefully we'll get to chat a bit about gender as well in the scene. And then January, we will be having our Patreon hangout. And in February, we will return with, and again, this is subject to change. Obviously, I don't control other people's lives, but we are slated to return with Andre out of Slovenia, from his YouTube channel, The Wave of Things. You may have also seen him as the host of the Gothicat festivals when the pandemic started as well. So we're going to be having a lengthy conversation about goth music and goth music from around the world as well. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for all the comments on our video last month. Thank you for everyone who listens on the audio platform as well, of course. And once again, if you are able, after this, head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. I cannot overemphasize how important that is to my life and well-being right now. But with that, thank you again for choosing to spend your time with us, if you made it this far, whatever you're doing, work, driving, commuting, chores, laundry, whatever it is. Thank you for including me in your day, for adding me to that socio-material network that you are a part of, and that is bringing forth, enacting your reality right now. It is genuinely an honor to simply just be a part of your life in that sense. So I hope that has changed your life for the positive. I know it's changed my life for the positive. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.